Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Municipalities of Saskatchewan's Candidate School Series, Governance 101, Village Hall. Today's session is going to be recorded and provided to you in the next coming days. And if you missed part 1, the introduction to local governance, that's completely okay. It'll be included in the recording of today's presentation, and you'll receive a recording and the PowerPoint of that session to get you caught up and informed. If you know anyone who's missed one or both of these webinars, they'll both be available for free on our Facebook page, as well as our YouTube page for your viewing pleasure at any time. I want to thank you all for attending, and it's great to have you here today. I want to encourage everyone to leave a message in the chat box. Go into the box and click on To All Panelists and Attendees, and let us know where you're from. I'm going to start today's presentation by asking you to fill out the following poll. It should be popping up on your screen momentarily, and it's just a multiple choice questionnaire that'll appear for everyone to see. When you're done, you just hit submit at the bottom and send it in. While we're doing that, I'm going to go through today's presentation page. My name's Sean Wiscar, and I'm one of Municipalities of Saskatchewan's advocacy advisors. Municipalities of Saskatchewan exclusively uses Zoom for all of our webinar and meeting requests. You can see the icons at the bottom of your screen. You have audio settings at the bottom left of your screen, and if you're having problems with the audio on your computer, you can use this setting to switch over to phone audio. You have Q&A for questions. Please note that you have the choice to send your questions anonymously. You also have chat for the comments, which I see many of you are using, so it's good to see. We have people from Merrifield, Karen Port, Star City, Tobin Lake. It's great to see all of you. And we also have the raise hand function. Will be used by us if we're having any technical difficulties or need any last minute feedback. I also want to thank our webinar sponsor, Brownlee. Thanks to Brownlee's sponsorship, we're able to offer this session to you today for free. I'm now going to hand it over to Derek King from Brownlee, who's going to bring greetings.
Thanks, Sean. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be back again. This is my 4th session that I've been able to participate in, and I'm really looking forward to tonight. So we'll do the formal stuff, and then we can get to the Q&A that you're all here for. So first of all, I want to welcome all of you tonight on behalf of the partners and associates of Brownlee LLP. As I said, this is the 4th session I've had the opportunity to participate in, and they've all been just excellent. And I have no doubt that tonight's panel will be able to answer your questions and give you competent, valuable, and informative advice, just as we've seen through all of the other presentations over the last few weeks. We're very proud at Brownlee to be able to sponsor these kind of events through Municipalities of Saskatchewan. So we want to thank that organization very much for the opportunity to do this. This kind of education for elected officials, I think, is absolutely invaluable to ensuring that whether you're a prospective elected official, or you're coming back for another term, that you have an opportunity to refresh your mind with respect to the issues that will face councillors once you're on council, and to understand the roles and responsibilities that you are going to be adopting once you're successful, if you're successful. So before I hand it over to your very competent panel here, I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are in case you're not familiar with Brownlee. We are a Western Canadian law firm, and what we do is municipal law. Municipalities, regional commissions, and associated entities are the clients that we work for. So we work for you. That's what we do. And we've been doing that for over 85 years. And our team of over 35 lawyers basically are there to do anything that a municipality needs with respect to legal services. And again, it's coming from that perspective that, that gives us such a sense of importance to these kind of sessions. We see that proactive education is frankly the best way to avoid problematic legal issues in the future. So with that formality all done, I would like to turn it over to the panel, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I will. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Derek. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Yvonne Jess holds an advanced certificate in local government authority and has 22 years of experience in the field. She is currently the administrator of the Village of Elbow and the Resort Village of Mississauga, having worked for 2 municipalities for the last 19 years. We also have Pat Jackson. Pat was born and raised in Manitoba, and she holds an Education 1A degree in middle years education from Brandon College and a Bachelor of General Studies from Brandon University with a major in Native Studies. Pat's teaching career spanned 2 provinces and at least a dozen communities and grades 3 through 12, as well as a principalship. After retiring, Pat has continued to work as both a substitute teacher and a tutor. During her time in Manitoba, Pat met her husband Larry and married him, and he has been her best friend ever since. They have 2 sons, Alan and Richard, and when the family first moved to Kipling, Pat decided to explore her interest in municipal government. She first joined council in 1988 and has served multiple terms as a councillor and a mayor since. Some of the more notable projects she has worked on has been the red paperclip trade, the construction of the new integrated health facility, and the updating of the town's bylaws and policies. I will note, Pat is from a town and not a village, and we apologize for not being able to get you a village councillor tonight. But unfortunately, all of the ones that we had asked if they would be interested were unfortunately busy. But that does go without saying, because Pat has plenty of experience, and she's more than happy to share it with you today. And if there are any village-specific questions, let us know in the comments or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we get those answered for you from the perspective of also a village councillor. But without further ado, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our presentation. Please take a couple minutes to submit your questions into the Q&A box. And please note that once we have questions coming into the chat box, if you put any questions in the chat box, they're not going to be read. We're only going to be reading questions out of the Q&A box. However, if you see a question in the Q&A pod that you think should be asked, you will have the option to give it a thumbs up at the bottom, and that'll elevate it higher so that we can ask it first. So I'll get Yvonne and Pat to turn their camera back on, and we will start off the session. Perfect. So my first question is going to go out to you, Pat. What inspired you to be a counselor?
I think I've always been a little bit of a political animal. I've always followed it, federal, provincial, municipal, every place I've been. And when I had the opportunity, having the time and kids old enough that I didn't have to be at home with them a lot, I thought it was the perfect venue for me to learn what it was all about. I was also quite blessed. I had a council that I got on with people who were absolutely committed to the community. And that's always been my biggest pull to working municipally, is to expand what I can do to help my own community. And now as a board member, to help communities, including many of the villages in the Southeast.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat. And our next question is for Yvonne. Yvonne, what is the best trait or quality in an incoming counselor that you like to see in as an administrator?
I think just being open-minded, willing to listen to the other members of council, willing to listen to the public. Everybody's got a little bit different take on the situation or feedback, and just the willingness to be open and consider everybody's viewpoint, I guess. I think that's important.
Perfect. We'll now go into the Q&A. So you'll notice questions are going to start populating in the Q&A box. So if you think that these questions should be asked, we encourage you to give it a thumbs up. And we also encourage you to fill this Q&A box with as many questions as you can. because over the course of the next hour, we're going to get through as many as possible. So our first question, which I'll pose to Pat, how much say does a village council have in setting increases in taxes?
The village council, as any council, has to decide through their budget process what income they need to cover their costs. They are the ones who do set the taxes, whether they use a base tax as the main part of it, or use the entirely through. Okay, I'm having a senior moment. It happens. Whichever route they take, it is the council that sets the tax rate that there's going to be for the coming year.
Perfect. And Yvonne or Derek, if you have anything you want to add in, feel free to hop in at any time. If not, we'll move on to our next question. And I'll pose this to Yvonne. If a town employee calls in sick for a day or more, can the mayor or a councillor do the job for a few days?
The short answer is no. Council are not staff. Council set the policies and procedures, and staff carry out those policies and procedures and bylaws and all that kind of stuff. So no, they should not be. Opens up a huge can of worms, including liability. So I'd say no.
Perfect. Derek, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that, well, I say no, then I'm going to talk. But no, I think that actually covers it. And that's the key thing I want to underline is it's the liability risk that goes with that. The councils are policy makers, they're decision makers, they're a legislative body. They're not there to do operational to take on operational action, especially given that you're not an employee. You may not be trained for the position that you're taking on. As well, you're putting yourself in a position where you're answerable to the CAO, who's answerable to council, and that's an untenable position. So whenever we see these kinds of things happen, typically in my office, if I'm seeing that kind of situation, usually it's because something bad has happened and liability has flowed as a consequence of it. So you do not want to see counselors stepping into those roles, even for 48 hours. Just don't do it.
Yeah, it's definitely good advice to stay out of trouble if you can, and make sure that you're staying within the parameters of your position. Our next question I'll pose to you, Pat. With the village council, how do you deal with conflict of interest in maintaining quorum?
With any council, it's a lot of it, I think, does rest with the CAO to check with the council ahead of time and make certain that there is going to be quorum. That's a relatively easy thing. And now, courtesy COVID, most of us are getting used to having our meetings done either on Zoom or some other platform, or even with phone in. So it's much less difficult now for people who have to be away for a particular meeting to get involved. As far as conflict of interest, at our council meetings, the very first thing that we do is the mayor asks for a declaration. Is there anyone who, having gone through all of the material for our meeting, sees that they will have a conflict of interest? And we state it right then and there. Having said that, of course, as you go through the meeting, you can discover, oh dear, I didn't say anything. At that point, you have the responsibility. Each councillor has responsibility for themselves to declare that they have a conflict and to leave the meeting so that they are not in any way influencing anyone who may be still discussing things there. Now, quorum in a village, if you're already at a situation where you've got one person missing, I suspect it could put you to the point where you don't have quorum in order to make a decision if someone else has to recuse themselves for conflict. That's Derek, help.
Sure. Yeah, you can pass the torch over to me on that one. Yeah, that's actually dealt with under Section 146 of the Municipalities Act. It's specifically there to deal with the impact of conflict of interest on quorum. And what it says, summarizing, is that you can't count the person who has the conflict of interest for the purpose of determining quorum, which is what Pat has already discussed. And so if that has the effect of, if you have a number of individuals who have declared a conflict of interest, and so you've lost quorum, the normal quorum that you would have with council, the remaining councillors can form quorum for the purpose of that decision only, the specific item before council. So for example, it's a budgetary item to buy golf carts, and you're the golf cart supplier, and your colleague is the competitor golf cart supplier, and you're both on council. You both declare that conflict of interest, and there's two other councillors available to make the decision. Their quorum for that specific decision. Where it breaks down, though, is if there's only one councillor left. So for a very small community where you may only have 3 councillors, for example, which we see in some of the jurisdictions we work in, if you've got 2 with a conflict of interest and you have 1 remaining, then Section 146 says that you may need to take the matter to court, to ask that a court on what they call an ex parte application deem that councillor capable of making the decision. And that's how the legislation deals with it.
Definitely a very technical process that gets certainly complicated. I'll just throw it over to Yvonne. Yvonne, do you have any examples of tangible times where, maybe your council has had to declare a conflict that, may help kind of people understand how this process works?
Yeah, it does come up fairly often, actually. With, in a smaller community, we've got 4 or 5 members of council. And so it can come up. Recently there was a subdivision discussion, and one of the councillors had land that the village was maybe interested in for that. So she declared her conflict and left the meeting. So anytime we have discussions around that, she's not in the council room. But like Pat said, we also at the beginning of the meeting, it's one of the agenda items where we ask if anybody has conflict of interest. It's just best to get that out in the open right away, or have that discussion. Do you think it is? Do you not? It's not up to the administrator to point that out. Each council member has to declare that or make that decision for themselves. Often, if you think you might, you likely do. So it's just easier to declare it, leave the meeting, and then there won't be any issues.
And Sean, I should offer a clarification. I actually misstated something there. I had said that the application was to allow the remaining councillor to make the determination. What it is it's an application for the court to decide that the council can make the decision notwithstanding the conflicts. So just wanted to clarify that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Conflicts are certainly a complicated scenario, and I think it's best stated that, declare often and declare early if you think that you may be in an issue. Our next question I'll pose to Pat, and then Yvonne and Derek, feel free to jump in. Is it possible to override a council decision?
I'm going to ask for clarification on the question. Is it possible for whom to override it?
So if this is your question, you can put your hand up in the participants, click the raise hand function button. And if you want, we can get you to ask this question verbally. If not, I guess we can just leave it as, I imagine, as a council member, is it possible to override the general decision of council?
In the 16 years I've been on councils, I have known occasions when one or more councillors have wished to override it, But if the majority has made a decision, then that becomes the decision of council. Period. End of sentence. It's a matter then of everyone taking ownership of it. If it's a matter of a resident wanting to override, this November 9th, will be the opportunity for them to express their displeasure. But not being certain who is intended in the question as someone wanting to override.
Just to add to that, then, and again, it's somewhat difficult to answer the question, not knowing specifically who the question it relates to. As Pat has said, you can't override the decision of council as a councillor. Once the decision is made, that's the decision. A council can, following normal processes of passing or amending bylaws or repealing bylaws or passing subsequent resolutions, can revisit a decision and make it a different decision. Sometimes you have to give consideration to what legal implications that may have on you. For example, if you've entered into a contract and now you want to rescind that agreement, that you can do that, but there may be legal consequences. There may be political consequences too, but I'm only qualified to speak to the legal ones. The other way that a decision of council can potentially be overridden is by a process of judicial review. In limited circumstances, if there are reasons to challenge the legitimacy of a decision of council, a member of the public who's affected, a member of council themselves, frankly, if they felt that the decision was incorrect, could bring an application for judicial review, arguing that the process wasn't followed, there was a procedural error, or that, for example, the decision was outside of the authority of the municipality to do. It's not within their legislative authority. And there's some limitations on that, but really that's the only two ways in the normal course that you would see a decision of council changed or effectively thrown out.
I just saw it come up, an indication that the question had been, can the mayor override council? Mayor has one vote, same as each other council member. And the mayor must vote. Unlike many of the myths that have been around, mayors aren't there just to break a tie. They are to be voting along with every other councillor that's there. And so that one vote, obviously it could tip it the other way, but the mayor in and of him or herself cannot decide that that he doesn't like the decision, therefore he will scrap it.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for adding in that clarification, and thank you everyone for your answers. Our next question I'll pose to Yvonne. Yvonne, from your experience as a CAO, do you think it's reasonable for a person with a full-time job to be able to put in the required time to be an effective counselor?
For sure. One of my council members, they farm, so they're still employed, but they're self-employed. Everybody else has a full-time job. Our council meetings in a village, typically just once a month, and we have them in the evening because everybody's working, and more than able to carry out the duties. There's sometimes, there's different workshops or like the SUMA convention or things like that. If you're able to take time off from work to attend, that's great. Sometimes there's committee meetings and stuff like that, but usually we're able to work around most things. So yeah, there shouldn't be an issue.
Perfect. And Pat, I don't know if you want to talk about from personal experience, what it's like joining council, and just what can you expect as a workload kind of coming your way?
That will be different for every single municipality. For me, it's been anything from the one meeting a month plus the prep, because I'm a strong believer that you prepare for that meeting, so when you get there, you're not having to read through a stack of material just to make a single decision, to and adding a couple of committee meetings every couple or 3 months, to times when I was mayor, when things definitely went sideways and 24 hours wasn't enough. But that doesn't happen often. I think for most people, it's the kind of a job that will fill whatever time you are prepared to allot to it. There's always something that you can be doing. There's always something you can be learning. There's always something you can be researching if you are so inclined and want to have something else brought to the attention of council that you feel might benefit your community.
I think that's an excellent point, Pat. And one of the through lines that I'll just mention to everyone through all of these sessions is a common theme we've heard from all of our counselors is you will get out what you put into your council role. So I think that's an excellent point, Pat. Our next question, and I'll pose this to you, Pat. Are there tools to use for council to do a self-evaluation process?
I'm not sure how vast the supply is, but I do know that we have, maybe we've just had a CAO who was able to find such, but we have had the opportunity several times to do evaluations on ourselves, never mind on our CAO, but so we can see how we feel that we are doing in our role, because we can't use the same kind of things that you use for a CAO. Our jobs are very, very different. Our purpose is entirely different. And so it has to be a matter of having something that is aimed at what we're supposed to do, how we are supposed to communicate with our constituents, and not looking at operational at all.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And I think that that's a great point, that you have to kind of seek out those resources and that they can be really helpful. Yvonne, is there anything that the Village of Elbow does in terms of self-evaluation?
No, council hasn't done that. What we've done often when a new council has been elected, and for the resort village of Mistosny, we've actually got, because their election was the end of August, their first meeting is this coming Saturday. And at the beginning of the meeting, we are doing a bit of a, what do you see in the next 4 years? A vision, getting an idea what every council member is wanting to see, or a vision for the community kind of thing. So we're just going to start off that way. But no, neither council has done an evaluation on how well they're doing it at that. But.
And Derek, is Brownlee, do they provide any similar service to this or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I was going to say that a number of our clients, a large number of our clients will take a twofold approach. They start every, after the election, they will start every new council off with a council orientation, which sort of sets the expectations, the requirements, the duties of council and administration, and sort of sets that stage. And then we'll follow up periodically with something that we've actually drafted a number of times for our clients, which is kind of just a checklist based on that council orientation, where they can go through and say, it's sort of a more summary version of that same orientation, but says, do I still know this? Am I paying attention to this? Am I ensuring, for example, that I'm staying on the legislative side of decision-making, not the operational side? So kind of just a self-evaluation that councils can do as a group or individually to sort of refresh themselves on what those duties and responsibilities are, and to make sure that if there is some slight course variation, they can correct that course and get themselves back on track in it before it becomes a problem. So there are, municipalities are kind of coming up with all sorts of different ways to do this, and that's just one that has become more common over the last number of years, for sure.
Yeah, excellent. I think all three great suggestions. And it's really going to be up to your council to kind of decide what route you want to go, but there are plenty of options. Our next question is a follow-up to the conflict of interest question we had earlier. What happens when a conflict isn't called or a quorum is lost, yet all three council members have discussed and voted on the topic? And I guess we can go to Pat to offer any suggestions of whether you've seen this in the past or heard of anything like this happening.
I have been on a council where conflict was not declared, and even though some of the rest of us knew that it should have been, it isn't up to the rest of us. It's got to be a personal decision that individual declares for themselves. Having said that, there are occasions when there'll be a quiet little, don't you think maybe you should, sort of thing, but it's nothing that can be overt. What can happen is you can end up with a decision that is tainted in terms of the perception from the community. I think Derek will also probably add that it can be a decision that can be tainted in terms of a legal redress to someone who feels that they did not have the opportunity to perhaps win a contract or whatever it may be, sell a wheelbarrow because their competition was voting. So it opens a real can of worms.
Yeah, Pat, you're absolutely right. I mean, my biggest concern always is, first and foremost, is public perception. You know, it has a negative impact on the public's ability to or their perception of whether they can trust their council, and that's always a terrible thing to see. There's kind of two ways we can look at this question. The first is what happens to the decision, and the other is what can happen to the individuals that participated in that decision. And Section 145 of the Municipalities Act deals with what happens to the decision. And I'll just read it here since I pulled it up. It says, if a contravention of Section 144 occurs, and that's the conflict of interest section, at a meeting to which the section applies, the proceedings related to that matter are not invalidated. So that means if you've passed a bylaw, if you've passed a resolution, that resolution or bylaw is not invalidated. But it says, but it goes on to say, but the council or other body may, within 3 years after the day on which a bylaw or resolution was passed or decision was made, declare the bylaw, resolution, or decision to be void. So, the decision can be undone within 3 years on the basis that this conflict existed. But the resolution itself, unless that is done, would still stand. And the reason for that is there has to be certain, there needs to be financial certainty, and there needs to be decision-making certainty, even if some counselor does not act in a proper manner with respect to a conflict. So Section 145 deals with that. What happens to the council member? That's the other question. If it's a financial interest, the Act is very clear. If you participate in discussion and voting, any discussion and voting on a financial interest, that is an act of disqualification. You are disqualified from office, and the Act says you must resign. So technically, those three councillors should resign if it's a financial interest. More often than not, that resignation doesn't come. In which case, either council, if there's other council members, if there's a majority on council willing to pursue this, or the public, if council isn't of the mind to pursue this, can bring an application to have those council members declared disqualified from office as a consequence of that financial interest. I can tell you those kind of applications are not often successful, only in that the court really doesn't like to interfere with the public's choice of elected officials and would prefer to see it addressed in the ballot box rather than by the court. But councillors have been removed in just those situations in the past, especially where the act of disqualification was egregious. So that's typically what will flow from those kind of actions.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek, and thank you, Pat. And I'm just going to circle back to a question we had earlier around time commitments. Someone in the comments did mention, they said they've been a village councillor for 14 years and worked in a far north camp. They had council meetings when they were off duty, and their work-life balance has worked out quite well for them. So there is a way to make a full-time job balance well with your council duties. So you just keep in mind that other people are doing it successfully. So there's no reason to think that as long as you're putting in the work to be prepped for your council meetings that you can't as well. Our next question is, if a decision is passed on a matter, can a council bring it back up to talk about it? Or once a resolution is made, is it set in stone? And I guess I'll pass this over to Yvonne first to see, do you have any examples of this happening in your communities, or do you have any advice for whether this could happen?
Yeah, it does happen if they'll pass a motion. Like it's not brought up at that same meeting, but at the next meeting, maybe they've had second thoughts about that motion. And if it hasn't been already acted on, you know, if the motion was that we're going to buy a new grader, well, if you've already acted on it and the grader's been purchased, you can't, you know, change it. But if the grader still hasn't been purchased at the next meeting, council could revisit it then. But if it's been acted on, the decision was made, and that's the way it is.
Perfect. Pat, do you have anything to add?
Just that with some really large projects, sometimes you make a decision and then you get more information over the next few weeks. And it makes good sense at times to go back and take a good look at that decision. It may have been right given the information you had. With additional information, is there a change that needs to be made? I agree fully with what Yvonne said. If the money's already started to flow through, you can't do anything about it. But if it's one of those projects where you are spending literally months preparing for it, it makes sense to take a look at the new information, revisit, see how it's going to affect the whole plan.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat and Yvonne. Our next question I'll pose to Pat, and then I'm sure Derek, you'll have something interesting to add. What is the best way to deal with nepotism in the councils? Hiring of personnel to awarding of contracts?
You want the really short answer? Don't do it. We've had occasions, and right now we actually have one twin on council and one twin who has been a long-standing, I'm talking nearly 30-year employee. And they work very nicely together because they work totally separately. One does the operations side and one does the governance side. But we have since then, I mean, you can't go back and change what was done 30 years ago. Since then, we have implemented a policy where if there is one person on council, a staff member cannot be hired from that family. I realize in a village it can be a totally different issue. I know a particular village where a nephew is working for the village and the uncle is on council, and it's not necessarily working well because the nephew feels that he does not have to answer to the CAO, just to his uncle. It's not a good plan. Nepotism never works. Derek, I can just see you ready to jump in.
No, it's you nailed it on the head. Nepotism never works. It causes a lot of grief. It causes suspicion. It makes for dysfunctional administration, and it really can undermine the relationship between administration and council. One of the things to be borne in mind here, of course, with respect to nepotism is this. Council doesn't hire anybody other than the CAO. And so if right off the bat, if council is in any way attempting to influence who the chief administrative officer hires for administrative positions, that in itself already is a problem. If you add to that you're trying to have a person hired who is related to you in some way, then that could be doubly problematic, not only because you're involved in an operational decision that is literally not yours to make, as well, if it's a certain kind of class of individual, if it's a close related person, you might be engaged in something that is actually a financial conflict of interest, in which you can actually, as a counselor, disqualify yourself from office. Because it's not just matters before council, it's discussion on any matter, discussion of voting on any matter in which you have a financial interest. So you've got to be careful there as well. The way to do it is for council to make it clear that those kind of decisions on the hiring are entirely the chief administrative officer's responsibility. Pat, you nailed it, like I said, right on the head. I've seen circumstances where an individual employee, and actually not even in a nepotism situation, but frankly, just a very close relationship between a council member and a member of administrative staff was such that the individual didn't feel that he had to answer to the CAO at all. And, and then eventually had his little group of people who also didn't feel they needed to answer to the CAO, and the whole system breaks down. And then you end up with, the minister asking for an investigation into the municipality, and the public become aware of it. It's a nightmare. So the best thing to do is to make it clear up front. Frankly, to even have policies in place, the CAO can put in place, and for council to support those policies with respect to avoiding nepotism in hiring.
Yeah, thank you both. Great advice, and I think you nailed it. You both nailed it, that it's just something avoid at all costs. You don't want the reputation, and you don't want the scrutiny of running into the kind of those risks. Our next question, Yvonne, I'm going to pose to you, and it's kind of an area we've already covered. So if you don't have much more to add, feel free, but it's on the subject of council working a village job. Is there any gray area at all? Say an employee is fired and a previous councillor held that position before they are and retired from that position to take a council position.
No, there's really no gray area there. If that councillor wants to go back to that position, they can resign from council and then become an employee if they get hired. But you can't be a councillor and an employer or employee at the same time.
Perfect, thank you. And our next question I'll pose to you, Pat. Is there a conflict of interest if you have a council member who is husband or wife is the CAO of the community? And have you ever heard of this happening? Maybe it would be a good way to pose this.
Have I heard of it happening? Never. I'm sorry, but it sounds like the opening for a very, very bad nightmare. I can't imagine. Now, the legalities I can't speak to, but I just think of the absolute problem with having someone on council and the spouse as the CAO. Conflict? I think that goes way beyond the legal conflict of interest. That's conflict, period. Legal.
It does happen.
Does it?
Yep, in the neighboring community. And the mayor declares a conflict anytime the administrator is paid, or if there's a question about holidays or anything related to her, he declares a conflict. Not ideal, no. And I'm not sure he's actually going to run again just to avoid that conflict. Like, they're aware of the conflict, but in really, really small communities, it is hard sometimes to avoid that, I guess. And if she was the only one certified that applied, yeah, but they have to be careful. And I don't think it's recommended by any means.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that. I mean, the short answer is you can have that situation, and it can operate. There's nothing in the act that says you can't have that situation. But exactly what the panelists have described to you as the problem is you're going to have a lot of conflicts, financial conflicts. That the spouse is a family member that is a clearly delineated person, a closely held interest, or a closely connected person under the legislation. So there's going to be many situations that come forward to council where the council member is going to have to declare conflict, which calls into question their ability to do their job. And I think from what Yvonne was describing, I think the mayor that she's referencing has kind of realized that. But theoretically, no, you can have that kind of situation, and as long as you follow all of the rules, it can run along quite smoothly. I would be very surprised to see it actually run very smoothly. And guys like me who work for municipalities get a little bit gleeful when we see those situations, because it probably means at some point a file will come in and we'll get paid for it. So, if it makes the lawyers happy, probably not a good thing to do.
I'm not sure how smoothly it runs at home for them either. So,
well, I didn't even want to touch
that's
that.
one of the issues.
I can't even imagine the living of the council meeting.
Yeah,
back at home.
Can't get away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. That would put you in a little bit of tricky situations, definitely in your personal and your public, and also your professional life. So. Yeah, certainly a situation where there may be a lot of questions and a lot of due diligence required. Our next question is going to be for you, Pat. Regarding being an effective counselor, should the responsibilities of the village be divided up between the counselors, or just left to those that may know how to deal with the situations such as water and sewer issues? What's your recommendation?
Very personally, I am not on the water committee to deal with water and sewer because I don't know enough about it. I am the first to admit I have massive gaps in my knowledge as far as that is concerned. I think I have learned a tremendous amount in the last 2 or 3 years as we've been doing our upgrades, because I go and I'm not afraid to ask the stupid questions in order to try and get some answers and try to learn. But I am very appreciative of counselors who do know. One of our counselors had part of his working life working with asphalt. So if we're doing some repairs to streets and roads, we turn to him to say, what's the best route for us to follow in this? Why not work to people's strengths? If people have certain knowledges, let's use it. That's making the best use of the human resource that we've got on councils.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point, that you need to make good use of the people you have and their expertise. Yvonne, do you have any advice on kind of how things are done in Elbow and kind of how job responsibilities are split up?
Yeah, it's nice if council can take on different, committees. Like we've got somebody on now that's got some HR experience, so she's kind of our go-to for that. So, and then staff also know, if we've got somebody in charge of maintenance or a couple counselors in charge of maintenance, if there's an issue, then our foreman knows who to go to talk to. And, if a tractor needs to be repaired or a question about a street or whatever, it's nice to split that up amongst the whole council. Yeah, I think it's a good idea if you can.
Perfect. Our next question is going to be for you, Yvonne. Does the CAO hire the town foreman, or is that responsibility up to the council?
According to the Municipalities Act, the CAO is the only employee of council. In reality, and I think there's something now in the Act too where it doesn't have to be that way. Council can have another policy around it. It's tough in small towns to do that. I think the larger your center, maybe it's easier, but our council is usually involved in hiring most of the staff, or a couple of them with me. And then like our summer staff, our summer maintenance people, then myself and the foreman will do that. Council's not usually involved in that, but the more senior positions, council's usually involved in that.
Perfect. Pat, do you have something to add?
I do. As I've said, I've been involved on councils since the 1980s, and things have really evolved over that period of time. I can remember the discussions around hiring not just the CAO, but many of the staff that we have had over the years. Now, our personnel committee is almost defunct. It's, in fact, our CAO came to us at our last council meeting and said, I'd like your input on hiring a particular person. And we basically said, no, this is not our job. This is yours. This person has to work with you, not with us. I think I agree with what Yvonne says about it being much more difficult in smaller communities. As I said, I spend a lot of my time working with various villages who are having issues. And one of the big things is that we don't have that separation between governance and operations. And many councillors in villages take umbrage at the thought that they only have one employee. With regard to what Yvonne said about there can be other routes taken for a council to have more control, I've got to say that's really stepping into the realm of scary. The Municipalities Act by itself is 248 pages. I have tried on numerous occasions to read it. I usually try to find the particular section. In fact, I've got a couple of them right here that I was researching. It's not our job as councillors to know that act, and that's only one of. There's OH&S, there's labor relations, there's so many other things. We don't have that. That's not our job. I know it's tough, but the more a council can trust the CAO, know that the CAO has the knowledge and the contacts, like Derek, like other CAOs, to be able to call and say, I'm not sure about this. Where do I find the information? That kind of thing. The stronger the council will be and the stronger the community will be. I get into some rather heated discussions periodically with councils from villages and even from towns who say, well, that's our job. We're elected. We should be making these decisions. No. And tough as it is, I think we need more and more to make the division. That doesn't mean it's a wall between. There's got to be lots of communication. But not trying to micromanage. Stay out of each other's sandbox. It's not up to Yvonne and the other CAOs to make policy, and it's not up to the councils to try to implement it. It is up to the CAOs to assist and to advise so that we don't make stupid policies, but we each have a job to do.
Yes, Sean, if I can jump in as well.
Absolutely.
I really want to underline what was said. First of all, I mean, I have this conversation with clients all the time, especially smaller communities, well, mainly smaller communities, and the issue of, well, you know, we have a small administration. Council, if it doesn't do this role, the administrator is overwhelmed. And I can understand that. But the legislation is very clear. And it's been reiterated here a number of times by the panel, and Pat, I think, spoke to it very eloquently here. The reality is that you may get away with that kind of decision making for some time, but it eventually will come back to bite you, because if council can be involved in hiring, they're going to expect to be involved in firing, and that's especially where you're going to have problems. Somebody can challenge that. You know, I wasn't terminated for property because I wasn't terminated by my boss. I was terminated by a decision of council, and that's invalid. And this really goes back to the fundamentals of what we've been talking about a number of times in the questions here, and that is, it is not council's job. And I know, and I've had councilors say this to me, you know, in 22 years, probably more than I can count on two hands, but this is our job. And it's not. If you read the legislation, in every jurisdiction I work in, Alberta, Saskatchewan, the Northwest Territories, in none of those legislation does it say that council's job is to do that, to be involved in hiring, to do any operational work whatsoever. It's quite expressly stated in the legislation, it is not their job. It also is very clear what administration's job is. And it is administration's job to hire everybody else. It doesn't mean that a council member can't say, I'm directing somebody to put his application before you. That's fine, but that's it. That's where it should end. I'm glad to see that your hiring committee has become defunct, because it really should be. Now, again, I understand that there's lots of pressures in small municipalities, and I'm giving a legal answer, and that's just one of the considerations. Completely understand that. But I do really want to underline that every time we see council delving down into administrative decision-making of any kind, whether it's hiring, firing, you know, where the grader goes, who drives it, you know, problems arise from that, and pretty substantial problems arise from that. And they can be very legally costly. So you want to tread very, very carefully here. And my recommendation is just exactly what Pat said. Trust administration to do the job that the CAO was hired to do. And if you don't trust your CAO, then you have an employee you can deal with, and that is you part ways with your CAO. But if you've hired a CAO and you trust that person, you have to trust them to hire the correct people to do the job.
I think, yeah, excellent answers from everyone. And just looking at the time here, we're quickly approaching 7:30, which is our end time. So Derek, you're going to be familiar with this because I've asked this, I think, of every session we've been in. Would all of our panelists be okay if we went just 15 minutes over? We just have a couple last questions that we're going to quickly see if we can get through. That works for everyone? Perfect.
I will say yes. My dog is saying no, but she can wait another 15 minutes for her walk. So
perfect. And so just a quick follow-up to what we were just talking about. Are there ways for councillors to override the decision-making items of the CAO, or recommend that they change how an activity is being handled? So the example they give is suggesting a different way for them to route traffic while paving is being done by a contractor. And I'll throw this one over to Yvonne first.
It's always nice if they come talk to the CAO first, and maybe, you know, we can listen to why they think it should be done differently. It's never best for them just to go tell another employee how to do their job. Yeah, ideally they would come to me. We would discuss what needs to be done or why they think that needs to be done, and then you can move on from there. But yeah, never the best thing to go tell somebody how to do their job.
legally it's improper too.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, this kind of goes back into the discussion we had before, which is these things happen. We see it happen a lot, but I can tell you that I've been in a number of lawsuits. I've been doing this for 22 years, and I've been involved in at least 3 lawsuits, which were started as a consequence of a counselor taking on responsibility the counselor does not have. And specifically, one was directing a crew of public works to reroute a creek that happened to be a pretty substantial fish habitat. Just decided that the work they were doing, ignore the engineers, do this instead. Another one was reprioritizing snow removal and a motor vehicle accident in an intersection that should have been cleared, but wasn't cleared contrary to policy. So let's boil that down. An individual counselor has no authority at all. They only have responsibilities, and that is to inform themselves, to participate, to enter into discussion, voting on matters, and then to support the decisions of council. An individual counselor has no authority over over the CAO or individual employees in the municipality. So the CAO, the counselor's job is just exactly what Yvonne suggested. Go to her, say, hey, I think we should be reprioritizing traffic while paving. I think it should be done differently. And here's why I think. And that information can be carried forward. Information can be taken to Public Works. What about this? Does this make sense? And if it makes sense, it can flow back to council. And council as a whole can then say, well, you know what? Let's change our policies. If it's a policy thing. If administration recognizes it's an administrative function, administration can say, no, I have the authority to deal with that, and I am going to change that. But that's how it should flow. There should never be direct communication between an individual counselor and an employee of the CAO as to how to do their job.
Perfect. Derek, I'll just do a quick fire question here for you. Do close personal friends fall under nepotism? And if a mayor or council member is suspected of nepotism, who should you be reporting it to?
Wow, okay. A lot of concern about nepotism. Makes me wonder what's going on. Nepotism isn't defined in the legislation, so let's put that out there right at the beginning. For conflict of interest, we talk about close personal relationships, basically. I'm paraphrasing the legislation, but so close personal friends don't fall into that category of closely related individuals for which can give rise to a financial interest. But there's also, the Act also talks about conflict of interest generally. And in those circumstances, yeah, you could have a non-financial conflict of interest because of your relationship with an individual, such that as a council member, you're not capable of approaching the matter in an unbiased manner. You're not capable of persuasion or, or depending on the nature of the decision, an individual looking at it might say, well, that decision, that counselor can't approach that with an open mind. Their mind is closed. So so you can have circumstances where a close personal friend would give rise to a conflict of interest situation, maybe a non-financial one, but a conflict of interest situation for a counselor. When we talk about nepotism, usually we're talking about family, but I think broadly speaking, the term has expanded over the years to basically mean, am I doing favors for people I like? Am I giving advantage of my position to somebody? And so I would say that on a broad interpretation of nepotism, yeah, a close personal friend could certainly fall into that situation. Who do you report it to? Well, one, you've got a code of you've got a code of ethics. In the municipal code of ethics should deal with those situations, and typically there's an informal or formal process that can be followed. So, number one, that would be the way to take it through. I think raise it as an ethics issue. Because if a council member is using their position of authority to benefit someone, that's a clear violation of the code of ethics, any version of a code of ethics that's out there. Beyond that, then there are, ombudsmen, you can take it to the ministry arguably as well. But typically the starting point is you raise it as an ethics issue before council.
Perfect. Thank you. We're going to switch gears over to a little bit of a funner question, I think. I'll give this one to Pat. Do council members get paid? Are there any financial perks?
I have seen numbers that go everything from you might be lucky if you could buy a cup of coffee with it, to some councils where you definitely could do your down payment. I don't know of any councils where you don't get some kind of pay, and they do it in different ways. Our council has a flat rate that's so much per month just for being on council, plus you get paid for committee meetings that you attend. If you have to drive, which of course we're not doing right now, you get paid your mileage and appropriate meals and things like that, reimbursements. Nobody goes into being on a council, and I don't care whether it's the tiniest village in the province or even most of the cities, looking to get rich. You're not in it for the money. If you don't choose to go on council because you want to make your community the best place it can be, you're probably not going to get a whole lot out of it. The money it can't end up being the big thing because it's not big money. And let's face it, all of us that are on councils in the villages and in the towns, we're not full-time paid councillors. Cities maybe. We don't operate that way. It's sort of volunteer with a few perks.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Pat, that you're not in it for the money. You're in it for the service to your community and to be able to volunteer. There's a couple questions that I flagged that I think are really important to ask before we end today's session. So I'll put this next one out to Yvonne, and then Derek and Pat, you can certainly add in. Do you think there are specific professional development courses or programs that you think would be beneficial to new incoming counselors?
I think I don't know if there's 6 modules of the Municipal Leadership Development Program that I wish every council member took those. They deal with all kinds of things, with development or public relations or human resources, and they're great. Really, any of the like SUMA convention. Of course, this year it's virtual, but I would encourage anyone to ever go to those if you can. And it'll be different this year virtually, but the networking aspect is so very important too. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, there's a community somewhere facing the same challenge you're facing. You just need to ask. Whether it's, well, whatever it is, you can phone a neighboring community or a similar size community and ask what they do, or what, did they pass a bylaw for that, or how did they deal with this situation? There's so much information out there that's available. You just need to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat, as a lifelong teacher, I'm sure you know what the difference between a good education material and a bad one is. So do you have any suggestions?
Well, I absolutely applaud what Yvonne said about the MLDP. Unfortunately, far too few counselors take the courses. I mean, they're the best bang for your buck that you can get. In a 6.5 to 7 hour day, you get credit for it. You can get all of the courses. My binder's this thick, and it's got a ton of information that I can keep going back to. But on our council, we've got 2 counselors and the CAO who have got all of their I'm a liar, 3 counselors now who have all of their MLDP. Another very good resource, and it's not only cheap, it's free for the most part. Thank you, Derek. The webinars that are being put on by Municipalities of Saskatchewan are very specific to a particular topic. And so you can learn a lot in a very short space of time. Convention, again, I'm old school. I know it's going to be very, very different. But for many of the people in villages who I know find going to convention just to be out of their financial means, please, please, please look into having everybody on your council taking part in at least some of the things of our virtual convention. There's so much that can be learned. The education sessions alone, even if we were driving, for me, up to Saskatoon is the long one, they're worth the price of admission right there. So there are tons of ways. I know from the administrator's perspective, because our administrator is part of it, they have a group, an online group. And she said oftentimes somebody will come up with this question. She might have dealt with it 5 years ago, but you do forget. And so they can feed off one another to get answers to things. There are resources available. And I'm going to put in a plug for the Municipalities of Saskatchewan staff. I have yet to come up with a question, and believe me, I come up with many of them, where I don't get an answer back. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 days while they're digging around and finding it, but I always get a response. And I've heard this from towns and villages all over the Southeast. They call in and they're so happy because they're not just sloughed off. It's give me a name, give me a number, and they get back to them. So we've got resources. And let's face it, all of us need it because we're not experts in this whole business of running a community, running the governance for a community. We're learning on the fly. And come November, we're going to have a bunch of new people who, in some cases, don't have a clue what's involved. And the more we can open it up, the more the senior, more experienced, older, whatever term you want to use, members of council can also be a huge resource.
Yes, thank you, Pat. I think you hit on most of the programs we offer. A couple other ones I'll just give a quick shout out to. We have the newly elected officials handbook, which will be available to you post-election if you are the successful candidate. Make sure you look through that. It has all of the resources we offer. It has the listing and description of all of the programs that Pat and Yvonne talked about, as well as many, many other suggestions and indicators of where to go if you have specific questions. There's also the Municipal Peer Network, which is a resource available for incoming counselors to ask questions of experienced counselors and experienced administrators. So I believe there is a counselor for every type of municipality, including a village. So if you have specific village questions, there'll be someone there that you can get in contact with and discuss whatever your question is. And yeah, just another huge plug for our webinar program. We try to offer 2 webinars every month on different topics. And previous topics have included COVID-19 reopening plans, programs that you can implement in your community, how to handle construction and building permits, and it's just countless. And we're always looking for new suggestions. And last but not least, of course, convention, as both of you mentioned. Make sure you come there. If you get onto council and you realize that your council may not even be able to afford the virtual convention this year, you can certainly get in contact with us. We do have a program which allows for some of our smaller communities and villages to apply to come to convention for free if they are lucky enough to win the draw program. So there will definitely be more information about that coming out, and you can certainly keep your eye out for information about convention as it comes in the next couple weeks. Derek, I'll just give you one last chance here. Do you want to shout out any Brownlee programs?
Why, thank you. Yeah, well, since you've let me walk through that door, I will. All of the recommendations are excellent, of course. Something that we do as well, though, is council orientation. And it's something that we've been doing for many, many years for our clients, where we, shortly after the election, will come in and do, typically we'll do half day, but often we can do full day seminars where we present on topics of governance, responsibilities, kind of roles and responsibilities of the MG or the Municipalities Act, pardon me. It goes back to, I think, to Pat saying, the act is quite big and she's made many efforts to read through it and has never done so. The program that we do is frankly intended to boil that down to the key things that counselors need to know to be able to do their jobs. And then often we will get asked again to do them partway through a term as a short refresher. And it looks like most of those are going to be done virtually this year, which makes delivery of them much easier. Frankly, keeps the cost down, and it makes it easier to actually do it for multiple municipalities, which is something we've been doing more and more to reduce costs for our clients, is to say, well, you've got neighbors. Let's get them all together and let's have 40 counselors in the session rather than 7 or 3 or what have you. So those are there as well.
Perfect. And the one last one I forgot to mention was the Municipal Leaders Roles and Responsibility Program. It's part of the MLDP module, but it's a great place to start for new counselors, as well as a refresher if you're coming in for a second or third term. Our last question, and we're going to cap it off here today. I'm just going to ask each of you, if you had one piece of advice you could give to incoming counselors, what would it be? What's kind of the one thing you wish you would have known when you were starting, or you wish you could tell an incoming counselor? And we'll start with you, Derek.
Sorry, you caught me just typing an answer to somebody who didn't get their question answered yet. I think I'll reiterate what I said last night, and that is there's so many things that I've experienced over my time of working for municipalities that come to mind. But I think a lot of it can be boiled down to when you're elected. You're elected because people, you have certain biases, you have certain goals, you have certain things that you want to see achieved, and the people who vote for you likewise want to see you achieve. But you're elected ultimately to perform your role in the best interest of the community as a whole. And in smaller municipalities where you're elected at large, it's less of an issue because you are elected for the community as a whole. But you can have certain subsets of interest groups within the community that support you, and that's all well and good. But as a counselor, your overall responsibility is to keep in mind, is the thing that I'm pursuing ultimately in the best interest of the community as a whole? Am I listening to my fellow counselors? Am I listening to administration? Am I listening to the outside voices, the public participation process? And am I getting all the information in? And am I keeping in mind not just what I want to achieve, but all that other information and making a decision that is in the best interest of the community as a whole? And I think if you always keep that in the back of your mind as a counselor, it will help guide you in ensuring that the decisions that you make are sound, are reasonable, and frankly, will achieve what ultimately everybody wants to achieve, is a functioning, effective, beneficial community that people are happy to be part of and happy to live in. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely excellent advice. Pat, one piece of advice?
I think probably one of the first things I tend to tell new councils, especially when I've been the mayor, is breathe. You're not going to change the world in a week. You're probably not going to change it in the 4 years. Take it one step at a time so that you're not overwhelming yourself. What Derek said is core. People have got to realize that they are not in it for their particular little interest, whatever it may be, that they should be looking at the community as a whole. What are the whole needs? And don't be afraid to ask questions and to try and learn. Something I was taught a long time ago, and as you can see, it works. It is most appropriate for me. I have 2 ears, I have 1 mouth. So I should be listening twice as much. And in my case, with the ears that I have, probably 3 times as much as I speak. And I think that's not a bad thing for all new counselors to realize, that they don't have to get up and change the world in a day.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely excellent advice, and I really like the 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's good advice just for life. Yvonne, we'll end with you. Any piece of advice?
Well, I wish I would have recorded what Derek just said, and I could have just played that at our council meeting Saturday with our new council members. But really, I just agree with both what Derek and Pat said there. And often new council members come on to council with the idea they're going to change everything, or those bylaws are stupid, or these rules are stupid, or whatever, right? They just want to change everything. And they just need to realize that often a lot of those bylaws or policies or whatever, they're there because legislation's requiring them to be there. And there's a lot of things you just can't change, or it takes time to change. Nothing happens super quick in the municipal world. It takes a little bit of time. And again, just, being open to listen to everybody, and everybody to work together as a team for the best, whatever's best for your community, I think. So, but yeah, that's it.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you 3. It was great to have you here on the panel, and I'll just apologize to everyone for going a little bit over time, but I think these are all really important questions to ask, and it was good that everyone had the opportunity to get their questions asked tonight. We're going to be providing you a recording of this presentation and to all the registrants in the next few days, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint from the intro session. And if you missed part 1 of the Governance 101 presentation, you'll receive a copy of that as well with the recording of today's presentation. I want to invite you all to take a few minutes to fill out this short survey so we can improve our upcoming events and also learn how to improve this session. I'm also just going to end today with a huge thank you. I want to thank you all for coming out today and taking time out of your busy schedules to sit in on this panel. A huge thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate you being here. And I just want to wish everyone good luck in your elections. If you're lucky enough to be elected to become a new councillor, we look forward to meeting you at our virtual convention in February, as well as in our regional meetings coming up in December. And we hope to see you soon at Municipalities of Saskatchewan webinar or at a future session. Another huge thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate it. As Derek mentioned, this has kind of been a marathon for us of 6 sessions over the last month. Derek sat in on 4, Yvonne sat in on 2, and while this is the only one that Pat has presented at, she has sat in on a number of them as well as an audience member. So it was quite the work to get this all done, and we really appreciate everyone joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Our pleasure, of course.
Perfect. And as the panelists, feel free to hop off. We're just going to keep it open until all of our surveys are done coming in. See everyone.